5 popular longevity strategies are trending everywhere, but instead of improving your health, they likely shorten your lifespan. Plus, they deviate significantly from the preventative care clinical guidelines. Number 1 is a low-protein diet, and the detrimental effects are made even worse when combined with number 2 on the list, which we'll cover shortly. Excitement for the low-protein diet kicked into overdrive after a landmark paper was published in 2014. That study trialed 25 different diets to see what the effect would be on mice lifespan. The authors found that longevity and health were optimized when protein was replaced with carbohydrate, resulting in the average lifespan increasing from 95 weeks to 125 weeks, or a roughly 30% improvement in lifespan as the protein content in the food decreased. The presumed mechanism for these findings centers around an enzyme called mTOR. So when we activate mTOR, we activate muscle and protein building. And when we consume protein, particularly the amino acid leucine, it powerfully activates mTOR. So by reducing protein intake, we reduce mTOR activation, and that results in the mice living longer. Think of it like the body can only do so much building, and once you reach that point, time is up. So if we can slow down that building process by reducing mTOR, we can extend lifespan. Added to that theory is work done on a molecule called rapamycin, which blocks mTOR, and when mice are given mTOR, it extends mice lifespan by about 20%. Overall then, it sounds like a compelling case, but here's the problem: we are not mice living in a controlled lab. Instead, a growing body of evidence suggests that higher muscle strength is associated with lower all-cause death rates even after adjusting for cardiorespiratory fitness. Human muscle undergoes remarkable changes with aging. We lose about 1% of our strength and mass per year from the age of around 40 years old. That's a huge problem and is why we should be trying to maximize our muscle strength in youth, maintain that muscle strength in our middle age, and minimize that loss in older age. And is why the clinical guidelines recommend to increase protein intake to maximize our muscle strength and stores. The International Society of Sports Nutrition suggests that adults should be taking about 1.4 to 2 grams of protein intake per kilogram of body weight per day to maximize the benefits from exercise. And ideally, our protein intakes should be evenly distributed across the day every 3 to 4 hours. Overall then, we want high protein intake spaced evenly throughout the day, so we want to have hits of protein intake to stimulate muscle building. Exploring those recommendations further, from a meta-analysis published in 2018, it suggests that the ideal protein intake is actually 1.6 grams of protein intake per kilogram of body weight per day. That is a lot of protein, but we see from a British Medical Journal paper published in 2020 that higher protein intakes are associated with a lower risk of all-cause death rates. Again, we are not mice living in a safe, controlled lab. Humans need to maintain their muscle strength to be resilient against disease. On the point of mTOR and muscle building, the negative effects of the low-protein diet are made even worse by the second popular longevity strategy, which is to use metformin for non-diabetics. And if you think things are bad already, wait until we add number 3 on the list. Metformin indirectly lowers mTOR and IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1. To avoid confusion, every day at the clinic I prescribe metformin for my pre-diabetic and type 2 diabetic patients. What I'm talking about here is longevity influencers using metformin for non-diabetics. And excitement for the strategy started to kick off in 2008 when we had a mice study suggesting that metformin increased lifespan by 37.8%. And in 2014, we had an observational human study suggesting that diabetics who were taking metformin appeared to live 15% longer compared to non-diabetics. Here are the problems though. That 2008 paper used spontaneously hypertensive rats. They are inbred and develop high blood pressure. So in 2016, the interventions testing program trialed metformin, but the difference here is that they used genetically diverse mice, and there was no benefit whatsoever seen from metformin. So the preclinical mice studies do not support the idea of using metformin for non-diabetics. And moving to the human studies, that 2014 paper that generated so much excitement is an observational study, so it's looking in the rearview mirror. That means that a lot of other factors can influence those results. So in 2021, a massive study was published by the Diabetes Prevention Program involving over 3,000 adults at high risk of type 2 diabetes. It was a placebo-controlled study over a 21-year period, and compared with placebo, metformin did not improve death rates, cancer, or cardiovascular disease. So the mice and human research does not support the idea that non-diabetics should use metformin, but here's the kicker. As explained earlier, metformin, it indirectly blocks mTOR, and we can see from multiple studies that metformin, it blunts the positive effects of exercise. It also reduces testosterone levels. So using a low-protein diet and combining that with metformin is terrible for our muscles and muscle strength, but it gets even worse. The next strategy that longevity influencers promote is intermittent fasting, which is especially bad when you add the fourth strategy to this mess. Now, just like metformin, it's important not to confuse this point. So some people find that intermittent fasting is a fantastic way for them to control their calorie intake and reduce their blood sugar levels and weight. That's brilliant. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about otherwise healthy people using intermittent fasting as a way to extend their lifespan. The proposed mechanism for this idea centers around a concept called autophagy, or the cell clearance process. Autophagy is strongly activated by starvation, so in the mice studies, when they are fasted for 16 hours, they activate autophagy and clear away their old, damaged components, resulting in a longer lifespan. Once again though, we are not mice, so a mouse fasting for 16 hours is vastly different to a human fasting for 16 hours. It's roughly the equivalent of a human fasting for 4 days. When we have a look at a Cochrane review that combined all of the relevant clinical studies together to see if there are any benefits from intermittent fasting, what they found is that there were no added benefits from intermittent fasting beyond calorie restriction. In particular, there were no added benefits to blood sugar levels. So, to be clear, because this often gets confused in the comments, there is no added benefit to intermittent fasting beyond calorie restriction. So when people fast during the day, they generally eat less calories, and if you're trying to lose weight or you're a type 2 diabetic, that's generally fantastic. But for otherwise healthy people, it's not a great strategy, and here's why. Most fasting diets do not achieve the ideal 1.6 gram of protein intake per kilogram of body weight per day target. Fasting diets also don't allow for correct protein timing. Remember, we want to have multiple protein meals spaced 3 to 4 hours apart during the day. We want hits of protein intake so that we can stimulate our own muscle building. That's why multiple reviews now conclude that intermittent fasting represents a suboptimal dietary approach for skeletal muscle, and it can impact the ability to maintain or enhance muscle mass and quality. And it's not just theory. When we do DEXA scans of people that do intermittent fasting, we can see significant decreases in their lean muscle mass. But muscle mass isn't the only problem when it comes to intermittent fasting. So most people who do intermittent fasting, they do the 16-8 strategy. So they fast for 16 hours during the day, and most people do this by skipping breakfast. That's a terrible idea. We have truckloads of human studies showing that skipping breakfast is terrible for our insulin levels, blood sugar levels, and it actually increases body fat percentages. The fourth damaging strategy that longevity influencers promote is resveratrol, and the fifth strategy is also a supplement. For people new to the resveratrol scandal, the initial hype kicked off in the early 2000s based on a series of lab mistakes and misconduct by Dr. David Sinclair that should have been stopped in its tracks in 2005 when Professors Matt Kaberlein and Brian Kennedy published a paper showing that resveratrol does not activate SIR2, which was the proposed mechanism for how resveratrol may offer benefits. Instead, the original hype was based on a lab error where it was the fluorescent dye that was activating the SIR2 gene. Nevertheless, David Sinclair sold his original resveratrol research to the pharmaceutical giant GSK for an eye-watering $720 million. After GSK spent millions more and realizing that this was a dead end, they shuttered their resveratrol and Sirtuin divisions. Unfortunately, the resveratrol hype continues to this day, despite multiple mice experiments showing no benefits from resveratrol whatsoever, despite clear evidence of absorption of resveratrol into the bloodstream. There's also no benefits from multiple human studies, and the clinical guidelines specifically advise against resveratrol supplements. And we now know the real impact that resveratrol has on our human cells. It stresses them, It's poison. So longevity influencers have pivoted to say that a low dose of this poison is actually a good thing. This low dose stress can signal to our cells that they need to become more efficient. Now this theory is utterly ridiculous. So you want people to take a low dose poison in an attempt to make the body more efficient? That just makes no sense. Particularly because we've got evidence of harm from low-dose resveratrol. So low-dose resveratrol is typically thought of as 250 milligrams or less. And we've got multiple human studies showing that just like metformin, resveratrol blunts the positive effects of exercise. And again, just like metformin, it lowers testosterone levels. So you can imagine if you're combining all four of these strategies, the detrimental effects that it would have on your muscle performance and strength. Let alone adding in number 5 on the list, which is antioxidant supplements, and then I'll go through what the preventative care guidelines suggest you do for a healthy, long life. So many longevity influencers will encourage you to take high doses of vitamin C and vitamin E for their anti-cancer and heart protection effects. But taking vitamin C as an example, we know that our cells have got all of the vitamin C that they need at daily intakes of only 100 milligrams. When higher doses are tested in humans, there's no benefit seen, so there's no improvement on cardiovascular disease, cancer, or death rates. Things are even worse for vitamin E supplements, where we can see an increase in death rates. Instead, what we want is a balance between oxidants and antioxidants, and taking high doses of antioxidant supplements can disrupt this balance. Plus, antioxidant supplements likely interfere with the benefits from exercise. So when we exercise, we stress our body and we release all sorts of oxidants. So that stress from exercise is a good thing. That, instead of resveratrol, does signal to our bodies to become more efficient. But if we're taking antioxidant supplements, that blunts that oxidant increase. So it doesn't give our cells as much signal to become more efficient. And we can see this effect in multiple human studies. You can see that these 5 popular longevity strategies are terrible for our body and they significantly weaken our muscles. They go completely against the preventative care clinical guidelines. Those guidelines suggest to increase lean protein intake, eat whole foods, regularly exercise, have high quality sleep, and overall increase your lean muscle mass. I'm a primary care physician. Every day at the clinic, there's a massive emphasis on preventative care. We want to prevent disease rather than treat it. We have a health coach who helps to optimize a patient's diet, exercise, and sleep. So when they see me, I can focus on things like cancer screening programs, blood pressure, blood tests, and medications if necessary. So I honestly don't understand why primary care should be rebranded to longevity. Instead, we should follow the preventative care clinical guidelines. And I've summarized those guidelines in a free, easy to read roadmap, which you can find a link to in the pinned comment. And as part of those preventative care guidelines, there are 7 specific blood tests that you should get, and you can learn about them in the next video here. And a massive thank you to all of the patrons supporting the channel.